When Clara Whitmore's husband was executed for a crime he didn't commit, she became invisible, blamed, shunned, and stripped of everything. Pregnant and carrying her 1-year-old daughter through winter prairie, she collapsed in the tall grass with nowhere left to run. That's when she saw him. Talon Greyhawk, an Apache hunter who offered warmth instead of judgment, shelter instead of questions. What began as survival became something neither expected, a family forged not from rescue, but from two broken souls learning to rebuild. Before we begin, I invite you to stay with Claire's journey until the very end. If this story moves you, please hit the like button and comment with your city so I can see how far her story travels across the world. The rope had snapped clean. Clara Whitmore heard it from outside the jailhouse. That terrible crack followed by the warden's voice calling it done. She hadn't been allowed inside. Women weren't permitted to watch. But she heard everything through the pine board walls, heard the trapdoor slam open, heard the brief shuffle of boots against air, heard the silence that followed. Thomas was gone. She stood in the November cold with Sarah bundled against her chest, 1-year-old and mercifully asleep, unaware that her father had just been killed by the state of Colorado for a crime he swore he didn't commit. Clara's belly pressed tight beneath her wool coat, 5 months along with their second child, a boy she'd never have the chance to name with her husband beside her. The crowd dispersed quickly. Hangings drew curious onlookers, but once the spectacle ended, people returned to their ordinary lives. Clara remained frozen on the courthouse steps, her breath coming in short bursts that fogged the air. She didn't know where to go. Their cabin had been seized 2 weeks prior, payment for Thomas's supposed debt to the man he'd allegedly robbed, a man who walked free while her husband swung from a rope. "You should leave, Mrs. Whitmore." The voice belonged to Sheriff Daniels, a man who'd once shared whiskey with Thomas on summer evenings. Now he looked at her with something closer to pity than friendship, and pity was a currency Clara couldn't spend. "Where exactly would you have me go, Sheriff?" He glanced away, adjusting his hat. "Anywhere that ain't here. Folks are angry. They want justice settled, and seeing you around town—" He trailed off, but the meaning hung clear. She was a reminder, a problem, an inconvenience. "Justice," Clara repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "Is that what you call it?" "I call it done." Daniel stepped past her, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. "Take my advice, ma'am. Find family. Find a new town. Find something, but don't stay here." She wanted to scream that Thomas had been innocent, that the evidence was thinner than creek ice in spring, that the real thief likely walked among them still. But Thomas was dead, and the living had already made their judgments. Her voice wouldn't change that. By nightfall, Clara had sold what little remained, a silver locket from her mother, 2 quilts, Thomas's pocket watch. She bought a mule, some dried goods, and a canvas tarp. The merchant who sold them to her wouldn't meet her eyes. The general store owner's wife whispered to her daughter as Clara passed, pulling the girl close as though widowhood and shame were contagious. Clara left Sterling at dawn without looking back. She rode west because west was away, because the mountains promised distance, because she had no other direction left to try. Sarah sat tucked in a sling across her chest, quiet and watchful in the way children become when the world around them turns uncertain. Clara sang to her softly, old hymns, lullabies, anything to fill the silence that pressed in from the endless prairie. The first week passed in a blur of cold camps and restless sleep. Clara rationed food carefully, aware that winter approached and her body needed strength for the child growing inside her. The mule plodded steadily, indifferent to her despair. At night, Clara wrapped Sarah in every scrap of fabric she owned and held her close beneath the tarp, listening to coyotes cry in the distance. The second week brought snow. It started as flurries, delicate, almost beautiful. But by the third day, the wind picked up, driving the snow horizontal across the grassland. Clara pushed forward because stopping meant freezing, because movement felt like purpose even when she had none. Her hands went numb inside her gloves. Sarah cried more frequently, hungry and cold, despite Clara's best efforts. On the 9th day, the mule stumbled. Clara felt the animal's gait shift beneath her, felt the tremor of exhaustion in its legs. She dismounted immediately, leading the mule by the reins, but the damage was done. By afternoon, the animal refused to go further. It stood shivering in the wind, head low, legs locked, Clara tried to coax it forward. She pulled the reins. She offered the last of the oats. She pleaded in a voice that cracked with desperation. The mule didn't move. She abandoned it there, taking only what she could carry: a blanket, the remaining food, and Sarah. The child weighed heavy in her arms, heavier still with each mile Clara walked through grass that reached her thighs. Snow gathered in the creases of the blanket. Clara's boots filled with ice water from hidden streams. Her breath came harder, her vision narrowing to the next step, then the next. She didn't notice when Sarah slipped from her arms. One moment the child was there, the next Clara's hands were empty. She spun, heart seizing, and saw the small bundle tumbling into the tall grass behind her. Clara lunged, her pregnant belly throwing her off balance, and caught Sarah's blanket just before the wind could take her further. The child screamed, a raw, terrified sound that cut through the storm. Clara collapsed to her knees, pulling Sarah against her chest, rocking and sobbing apologies into her daughter's hair. I'm sorry, I've got you, I'm so sorry." But she didn't have her. Not really. She had no shelter, no warmth, no way to keep Sarah safe through the night that was already falling fast around them. Clara looked up at the darkening sky, at the snow that showed no sign of stopping, and felt the full weight of her failure settle like stone in her chest. She was going to lose her daughter. She was going to lose both her children. She was going to die here in the grass, and no one would ever know. No one would care. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it brought a strange, hollow calm. Clara gathered Sarah close and started walking again, though she no longer knew which direction she moved. She simply walked because stopping meant surrendering, and some stubborn part of her refused to quit while breath still moved through her lungs. She didn't see the trees until she nearly walked into them. The forest appeared like a wall rising from the prairie: ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, their branches heavy with snow. Clara staggered between the trunks, desperate for any break from the wind. The temperature dropped further beneath the canopy, but at least the snow fell lighter here, filtered through needles and limbs. She made it another 100 yards before her legs gave out. Clara sank against the base of a massive pine, Sarah crying weakly in her arms. She tried to arrange the blanket to cover them both, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. Everything felt distant now: the cold, the hunger, even Sarah's cries. Clara's eyes drifted closed. "You cannot sleep here." The voice cut through the fog in her mind, low and accented in a way she'd never heard before. Clara's eyes snapped open. A man stood 3 feet away, so still she hadn't noticed his approach. He wore buckskin and fur, his long black hair braided back from a face carved by wind and sun. Dark eyes studied her with an intensity that should have frightened her, but somehow didn't. A rifle rested easy in his hands, not aimed, but present. Clara tried to speak, but her throat closed around the words. The man shifted his gaze to Sarah, who had gone quiet against Clara's chest. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture softened almost imperceptibly. He looked back at Clara, then at the darkening forest around them. "Can you walk?" Clara shook her head. She wasn't sure she could even stand. The man considered this for a long moment. Then he slung his rifle across his back and stepped forward, crouching beside her. He smelled like pine smoke and leather, and something earthy she couldn't name. Without asking permission, he slipped one arm beneath her shoulders and another beneath her knees, lifting her as though she weighed nothing despite her pregnancy and the child in her arms. Clara should have protested, should have been afraid. But exhaustion and desperation had burned through propriety days ago, and this man, whoever he was, represented the only chance she had left. "Where are you taking us?" she managed to whisper. "Somewhere warm." His voice carried no emotion, just simple statement: "Hold the child close." Clara tightened her grip on Sarah as the man began to walk, moving through the forest with the confidence of someone who knew every root and stone beneath the snow. The trees blurred past. Clara's head lolled against his shoulder, consciousness fading in and out like a candle in the wind. She woke to firelight. Clara jerked upright, momentarily disoriented, then felt Sarah's weight still against her chest and forced herself to breathe. They were inside, not a house, but some kind of shelter built into the hillside, half cave and half construction. A fire burned in a ring of stones, smoke rising through a natural chimney in the rock above. Animal hides covered the floor and hung across the entrance, blocking the wind. The temperature inside felt warm enough to stop shivering, which alone seemed miraculous. The man knelt by the fire, stirring something in a small pot suspended over the flames. He glanced at her when she moved, but didn't speak. Clara looked down at Sarah. The child slept deeply now, her breathing even, her cheeks flushed with warmth instead of cold. Someone had wrapped a fur around them both, rabbit or beaver, soft against Clara's hands. "Where are we?" Clara's voice came out hoarse. "Redridge Hollow." The man kept his attention on the pot. 2 miles from where I found you. I don't have any money. I can't pay you for... I did not ask for payment. He lifted the pot from the fire, poured steaming liquid into a wooden cup, and brought it to her. "Drink." Clara took the cup with trembling hands. The contents smelled like meat and herbs, rich and savory. She sipped cautiously, broth thick with fat and salt, the best thing she'd tasted in weeks. She wanted to gulp it down but forced herself to drink slowly, aware her stomach might rebel after days of meager rations. The man returned to the fire and sat cross-legged, watching the flames. He seemed content to let silence fill the space between them, but Clara's mind raced with questions she didn't know how to ask. Who was he? Why had he helped her? What did he expect in return? "My name is Clara," she offered finally. "Clara Whitmore. This is my daughter, Sarah." The man nodded once. "Talon. Just Talon. Talon Greyhawk." He paused, then added, "Apache." Clara absorbed this. She'd heard stories about Indians, of course, some frightening, some romantic, most somewhere between truth and fiction, but she'd never actually met one until now, had never been dependent on one for her survival. She studied him across the fire, noting the calm efficiency in his movements, the way he occupied space without dominating it. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for finding us, for bringing us here. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't... You would have died." Talon's bluntness wasn't cruel, just factual. "The child, too." Clara's throat tightened. "Yes. Why were you alone in the storm?" The question hung simple and direct. Clara looked down at Sarah, at the firelight playing across her daughter's sleeping face, and felt the whole terrible story pressing against her chest. She didn't owe this stranger an explanation, but he'd saved their lives, and some part of her desperately needed to tell someone, anyone, what had happened. "My husband was executed 2 weeks ago," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said he robbed a man, said he attacked him and stole $300. But Thomas never..." She swallowed hard. "He never did it. I know he didn't. But they hanged him anyway." Talon's expression didn't change, but she felt his attention sharpen. "After he died, people blamed me. Said I must have known, must have been involved somehow. They took our cabin, took everything we owned, told me to leave town." Clara's hands tightened around the cup. "So I did. I didn't have anywhere to go, so I just went west. I thought maybe I could find work somewhere, find a town that didn't know my name. But then the storm came, and the mule gave out, and I..." Her voice broke. She couldn't finish. Talon stirred the fire with a long stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, something almost gentle beneath the usual flatness. "My wife died 3 winters ago, our son with her." Clara looked up sharply. Talon kept his gaze on the fire, his profile illuminated in orange and shadow. "Sickness came to the camp. Many died. I could not stop it." He fell silent for a moment, then continued. "After, I left. Could not stay where everything reminded me of them. Came here to the hollow." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered, "as am I, for your loss." They sat together in shared grief, the fire crackling between them. Outside, wind howled through the trees, but inside the shelter felt almost peaceful. Sarah shifted against Clara's chest, making small sleeping sounds. Clara finished the broth and set the cup aside. "You should sleep," Talon said. "Tomorrow, you need strength." "For what?" "For staying alive." He stood and crossed to a pile of furs near the back wall, pulling out several more. He laid them beside Clara, creating a makeshift bed. "The storm will last 2, maybe 3 days. You will stay here until it passes." Clara wanted to argue, to insist she couldn't impose, but exhaustion weighed heavier than pride. She shifted Sarah gently onto the furs, then lay down beside her daughter, pulling the coverings over them both. The warmth was extraordinary. The first time she'd felt truly warm in weeks. "Talon?" she called softly. He turned from where he'd settled on the opposite side of the fire. "Why did you help us?" "You didn't have to. We're strangers." Talon was quiet for so long Clara thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured. "No one should die alone in the snow. Not if they can be saved." Simple words, but they carried the weight of someone who'd watched people die, who understood the value of intervention when intervention mattered most. Clara closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her temples. "Thank you." Sleep, Clara Whitmore. She did, deep and dreamless, the sleep of someone who'd been running for so long that stopping felt like surrender and salvation all at once. When Clara woke, gray light filtered through gaps in the hide covering the entrance. The fire had burned down to coals, but someone had banked it carefully to preserve heat. Sarah still slept beside her, peaceful and warm. Talon was gone. Clara sat up slowly, her body aching from cold and travel and pregnancy. She needed to relieve herself badly, but stepping outside meant braving the storm. She struggled to her feet, wrapped a fur around her shoulders, and pulled back the hide covering. Snow fell steadily, but without yesterday's violence. The world looked clean and white and impossibly quiet. Clara stepped out quickly, did what she needed to do behind a nearby tree, then hurried back inside before the cold could penetrate the fur. Talon appeared minutes later, snow dusting his shoulders and hair. He carried 2 rabbits, already gutted and cleaned, their bodies still steaming slightly in the cold air. He didn't acknowledge Clara, just set to work preparing the animals for cooking, skinning them with practiced efficiency, spearing the meat on wooden stakes propped over the fire. Clara watched him work, noting the economy of his movements, the way he wasted nothing. The hides went into a pile near the wall. The bones and organs disappeared outside, likely for scavengers. Within 20 minutes, rabbit meat sizzled over the flames, filling the shelter with rich, savory smoke. "Can I help?" Clara asked. Talon glanced at her. "You know how to cook over open fire?" "No." "Then watch, learn." So she did. She watched how he rotated the meat to cook evenly, how he tested doneness by pressing the flesh with his knife, how he let the fat drip into a wooden bowl to save for later use. When the rabbit finished cooking, he divided it into portions, one for Clara, one for himself, and a small piece he shredded finely before offering it to Sarah, who had woken and sat watching with wide, curious eyes. The child took the meat tentatively, then ate it eagerly, making happy sounds that were the first non-crying noises she'd made in days. Clara's chest tightened watching her daughter eat solid food with such enthusiasm. "She's hungry," Talon observed. "We've been rationing," Clara admitted. "I wasn't sure how long the supplies would need to last." Talon said nothing, but he added more rabbit to Sarah's portion. They ate in silence, not uncomfortable, just quiet. Clara found herself relaxing slightly, the immediate terror of survival giving way to simple presence. Sarah babbled to herself, playing with scraps of fur. The fire warmed the space. Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside felt almost like sanctuary. "How long have you lived here?" Clara asked eventually. 3 years. "Alone the whole time?" "Yes." "Doesn't it get lonely?" Talon considered the question while pulling a bone from his portion of rabbit. "Sometimes. But lonely is different than being around people who make you feel alone." Clara understood that better than she wanted to admit. She'd felt profoundly alone in Sterling those last weeks, surrounded by people who'd once been neighbors and friends. Their judgment had been louder than any isolation. "Where did you live before? Before the Hollow?" "South. With my mother's people." Talon fed another stick to the fire. "But after my family died, I could not stay. Their ghosts were too loud." "Do you ever think about going back?" "No." The finality in his voice discouraged further questions in that direction. Clara shifted to something more practical. "What do you do out here? How do you survive?" "Hunt, trap, trade sometimes with prospectors passing through, grow what I can in summer." He gestured toward the back of the shelter where Clara now noticed bundles of dried plants hanging from rock protrusions. The land provides if you know how to ask. And winter? Winter is quiet, good for thinking. Sarah crawled over to Talon, drawn by curiosity more than fear. She pulled herself up on his leg, staring at him with intense toddler scrutiny. Talon looked down at her, his expression unreadable. She's not afraid of you, Clara noted. Children see clearly. They haven't learned to fear what others tell them to fear. Sarah grabbed at the beading on Talon's shirt, small white and blue patterns Clara hadn't noticed before. He let her explore for a moment, then gently redirected her hands, pulling a small carved figure from his pocket. It looked like a bird, maybe an eagle, whittled from soft wood and worn smooth from handling. He offered it to Sarah. The child took it with both hands, turning it over, bringing it to her mouth to test with her gums. "You don't have to," Clara started. "She needs something to occupy her hands." Talon stood and moved back to the fire. "Otherwise, she will find things not meant for children." Clara watched Sarah gnaw happily on the carving, then looked at Talon. "You're good with her." "I had a son." His voice remained neutral, but Clara heard the weight beneath it. "I remember what they need." "How old was he?" "2 winters, old enough to walk, old enough to laugh." Talon poked the fire with unnecessary force. "Not old enough to survive the sickness." "I'm sorry," Clara said again, feeling the inadequacy of the words. Talon nodded once, then changed the subject. "You said you are carrying another child." Clara's hand moved instinctively to her belly. "Yes, due in spring." "Here?" The question hung heavy. Clara hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't let herself think beyond the next meal, the next mile. But now, sitting in relative warmth and safety, the reality crashed over her. Where would she be when the baby came? What would she do with a newborn and a toddler and no home, no husband, no support? "I don't know," she admitted, her voice small. Talon studied her across the fire. "The storm will end in 2 days. When it does, you have choices. I will take you to the nearest town if you wish, or—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "You can stay until you decide what comes next." Clara's breath caught. "Stay here? In the hollow? The shelter is warm. There is food. You would be safe while you carry the child." His gaze remained steady. "After the birth, you choose again. Go or stay. But while winter holds, you do not travel alone with children." It was the most he'd said at once, and the offer hung between them like something fragile and impossible. Clara's mind raced. Stay here with a stranger, an Apache hunter she'd known less than a day? It seemed insane. But the alternative, returning to the brutal cold, the uncertainty, the very real possibility of death, seemed worse. "Why would you let us stay?" she asked. Talon fed another stick to the fire. "The shelter is large enough. You help with work. Sarah is too young to be dangerous." He almost smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "And I told you, no one should die alone in the snow." "I can't pay you. I have nothing to offer." "Did I ask for payment?" "No, but—" "Then it is not a debt." Talon stood and moved toward the entrance. "Think on it. I will check the traps." He pulled on heavier furs and disappeared into the snow, leaving Clara alone with Sarah and a decision that felt both obvious and terrifying. She looked around the shelter, at the carefully tended fire, the organized supplies, the furs that had kept them warm through the night. She looked at Sarah, who played contentedly with her wooden bird, safe and fed for the first time in weeks. She put her hand on her belly and felt the flutter of movement inside. The child who would come, whether she was ready or not. Clara Whitmore had run out of options the moment she left Sterling, but maybe, just maybe, she'd stumbled into something better than an option. Maybe she'd found a chance. When Talon returned an hour later with 3 more rabbits and a grouse, Clara had made her decision. "We'll stay," she said simply. "Until spring, if the offer still stands." Talon nodded once, hanging the game near the entrance. "It stands. I'll earn my keep. I can clean, cook once you teach me, mend things. You will rest. You carry a child and need strength." He began plucking the grouse with steady efficiency. "When you are stronger, then you work. Clara wanted to argue but recognized the wisdom in his words. She was exhausted, bone-deep tired in a way that sleep alone wouldn't fix. She needed time to recover, to let her body remember what safety felt like. "Thank you, Talon." He didn't respond, just continued plucking feathers, but Clara thought she saw the smallest relaxation in his shoulders, the barest acknowledgement of something shared. Outside, snow continued to fall over Red Ridge Hollow, covering the world in white silence. But inside the shelter, a fire burned steady, and for the first time since the rope snapped and took Thomas from her, Clara felt the possibility of something beyond survival. She felt the faint, fragile beginning of hope. The storm broke on the third day, leaving the world crystalline and still. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through cracks in the hide covering, actual sunlight, golden and warm against her face. She sat up carefully, mindful not to wake Sarah, who slept curled against her side like a small furnace. The fire had burned low, but Talon had already stoked it back to life, the flames crackling cheerfully as if celebrating the weather's mercy. Talon himself sat near the entrance, working a piece of deer hide with a bone scraper. He glanced up when Clara stirred but said nothing, returning his attention to the leather. Clara watched him work for a moment, noting the rhythm of his movements, steady, patient, completely absorbed in the task. "The storm's over," she said, more statement than question. "Yes." "What happens now?" Talon set down the scraper and stretched, his joints popping softly in the quiet. "Now I check the trap lines. Clear snow from the winter cache. Make sure the hollow survived." He stood and moved toward his gear hanging near the back wall. "You rest. Eat what you need from the stores. I want to help." "You are not strong enough yet. I'm stronger than I was 3 days ago." Clara pushed herself to standing, ignoring the protest from muscles still recovering from her ordeal. "You said I'd earn my keep once I was able. I'm able." Talon studied her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "The work is hard, cold. I've been cold before." Something that might have been approval flickered across his expression. "Then dress warm. We leave when you are ready." Clara bundled Sarah in furs near the fire with the wooden bird and some strips of dried meat to occupy her hands and mouth. The child seemed content in the warmth, babbling to herself in the private language toddlers speak. Clara pulled on every layer she owned, then accepted the additional fur Talon offered. Wolf, by the look of it, thick and heavy across her shoulders. Outside, the world had transformed into something from a dream. Snow lay pristine and undisturbed except for animal tracks. Rabbit, deer, something larger Clara didn't recognize. The trees stood like sentinels wrapped in white, their branches bowed under the weight. The air tasted clean and sharp, burning Clara's lungs with each breath. Talon moved through the landscape with the easy confidence of someone who belonged here, who knew every tree and stone and hidden danger. Clara followed in his footsteps, literally placing her boots in the depressions he left behind. Walking was easier that way, the snow already compressed by his weight. They walked for 20 minutes before reaching the first trap. A simple snare set among a stand of young aspen. Empty. Talon reset it without comment and moved on. The second trap held a rabbit, frozen solid overnight. Talon removed it efficiently, reset the snare, and hung the rabbit from his belt. "How many traps do you have?" Clara asked. 15 in the near circuit, another 20 further out. He pushed through a drift that came up to his knees. "I check the near ones every few days, the far ones weekly." "And they provide enough?" "Usually. Some seasons better than others." He paused at the third trap, another empty snare. "Winter is lean, spring brings plenty." They continued the circuit in relative silence, broken only by Talon's occasional observations about animal sign or weather predictions Clara didn't fully understand but found herself listening to anyway. He moved through the wilderness, reading it like others read newspapers. Every track told a story, every broken branch offered information, every shift in the wind carried meaning. By the time they'd checked all 15 traps, they'd collected 4 rabbits and a marten. Talon seemed satisfied with the haul. "Now the cache," he said, turning toward a rocky outcropping Clara hadn't noticed before. The winter cache turned out to be a natural hollow beneath the rocks, reinforced with stacked stones and covered with heavy hides weighted down by logs. Talon removed the weights carefully, checking the hides for damage from the storm. Inside, Clara glimpsed neat rows of wrapped packages: smoked meat, dried berries, root vegetables buried in sand, sealed clay pots of what might have been rendered fat or preserved food. "This is impressive," Clara said, genuinely awed by the organization. "It keeps you alive." Talon pulled out several packages, examined them, then replaced them carefully. "In deep winter, when hunting is poor, this feeds you. If you do not prepare, you die." "Did you do all this yourself?" "Who else would do it?" The question hung between them, not hostile, just literal. Of course he'd done it himself. He'd been alone here for 3 years, surviving through preparation and skill and sheer stubborn resilience. Clara felt a flash of inadequacy, thinking of her own helplessness when the storm had caught her on the prairie. "Will you teach me?" she asked quietly. "How to do this? How to survive out here?" Talon looked at her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "You want to learn?" "I need to learn. I can't depend on charity forever." Clara met his gaze steadily. "If I'm going to stay through winter, I should know how to contribute, how to take care of myself and Sarah." "And the child you carry?" "Especially that child." Clara's hand moved to her belly. "I won't always have help. I should know what to do when I don't." Talon nodded slowly, something like respect entering his expression. "Then I will teach you, but you learn by doing, not watching." "I wouldn't expect otherwise." They returned to the shelter to find Sarah exactly where they'd left her, now asleep again on the furs with the wooden bird clutched in one small fist. Clara felt a rush of relief seeing her daughter safe and peaceful, a feeling she suspected might never entirely fade, no matter how secure their situation became. Talon hung the game near the entrance and built up the fire. "Now you learn to prepare what we caught." For the next hour, Clara received a practical education in frontier survival. Talon showed her how to skin the rabbits without damaging the hides, how to gut them cleanly, how to separate the meat from the bones, and save everything that had value. The work was messy and cold, and Clara's hands cramped within minutes, but she pushed through, determined to master at least the basics. "You waste nothing," Talon said, watching her struggle with the fourth rabbit. "The meat feeds you today. The bones make broth tomorrow. The hide becomes clothing or trade. The organs go to the traps as bait." He guided her hands, showing her the angle to cut. "Everything has purpose, remember that." Clara nodded, focusing on the blade work. Blood stained her fingers despite the cold, and the smell of raw meat made her pregnancy-sensitive stomach twist, but she refused to stop. When she finally finished the last rabbit, Talon examined her work with a critical eye. "Acceptable," he said, which Clara sensed was high praise. "Tomorrow you will do it faster." They cooked 2 of the rabbits for dinner, roasting them slowly over the fire until the meat fell tender from the bone. Sarah woke and ate enthusiastically, making appreciative sounds that pulled something close to a smile from Talon. They ate together in the gathering darkness, the shelter warm and filled with the smell of cooking meat and wood smoke. After dinner, Talon pulled out the deer hide he'd been working earlier and returned to scraping it clean. Clara watched for a few minutes, then asked, "Can you show me how to do that?" Talon handed her a second hide and a bone scraper. "Hold it like this. Angle the scraper this way. Use steady pressure, not force." Clara tried, immediately doing it wrong. The scraper slipped and she nearly cut the hide. Talon reached over and adjusted her grip, guiding her hands through the motion until she found the right rhythm. It was tedious work, repetitive and demanding, but Clara found something meditative in it. The simple focus required, the tangible progress, as the hide slowly grew softer beneath her hands. They worked together in comfortable silence, the only sounds the scrape of bone on leather and the crackle of the fire and Sarah's quiet babbling as she played with scraps of fur. The scene felt strangely domestic, almost peaceful. Clara couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this settled. "Talon," she said after a while, "can I ask you something?" "You are asking now." Clara smiled despite herself. "Why did you leave your people? After your family died, I mean. Why come here alone instead of staying with your tribe?" Talon was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her hands still on the hide. "Because they pitied me. Every day I saw it in their eyes, pity for the man who could not save his wife and son. He set down his scraper, staring into the fire. I did not want pity. I wanted silence. I wanted to be somewhere I could grieve without audience. And did you find that? Here? Eventually. He picked up the scraper again, returning to his work. The first year I was angry at the sickness, at myself, at the world. The second year I was empty. The third year, he paused. The third year I began to remember them without only pain, began to see the hollow as home instead of exile. Clara understood that progression intimately. She'd experienced her own version in the weeks since Thomas died. Anger first, then numbness, and now the tentative beginning of something that might eventually become acceptance. "Do you ever regret leaving?" she asked. "Sometimes. But regret does not change the past." Talon glanced at her. "What about you? Do you regret leaving your town?" "No?" The answer came quickly, surprising Clara with its certainty. "I regret what happened to Thomas. I regret that Sarah will grow up without her father, that this new baby will never know him. But leaving Sterling?" She shook her head. "That was survival. I don't regret surviving." "Good." Talon returned his attention to the hide. "Regret is poison. It kills slowly but completely." They lapsed back into silence, working until Clara's hands ached too much to continue. She set the scraper aside and flexed her fingers, trying to work feeling back into them. Talon noticed and reached for a small clay pot near his supplies. "Here." He scooped out a thick, pale substance that smelled of herbs and fat. "For your hands, rub it in before you sleep." Clara accepted the salve and worked it into her palms, feeling the ache ease slightly. "What is this?" "Bear grease, beeswax, yarrow, comfrey. Heals the skin." He put the pot away. "You will need it often if you keep working." "I intend to keep working." "Then you will need it often." Clara smiled and settled back against the furs, pulling Sarah into her lap. The child was growing drowsy again, full-bellied and warm. Clara stroked her daughter's fine hair and felt the baby inside her shift and roll, reminding her of its presence. "Talon," she said quietly, "thank you for all of this, for teaching me, for letting us stay. I know you didn't have to. You have thanked me many times. Once was enough. Still, I want you to know I'm grateful." Talon looked at her across the fire, his expression unreadable in the dancing light. "Then show gratitude by learning, by staying alive through winter, by bringing your child into the world healthy." He paused. "That is thanks enough." Clara nodded, something warm and tight expanding in her chest. She settled Sarah onto the sleeping furs and lay down beside her daughter, exhaustion pulling her towards sleep despite the early hour. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was Talon adding wood to the fire, making sure it would burn through the night, keeping them warm and safe in the hollow that was slowly becoming something more than shelter. The days developed a rhythm after that. Clara woke early, helped Talon prepare breakfast, learned whatever skill he decided to teach that day. Some days they checked trap lines. Other days he showed her how to identify useful plants even in winter, how to find water beneath ice, how to read weather signs and cloud formations and animal behavior. Clara absorbed everything with desperate focus, aware that this knowledge might mean the difference between life and death come spring. Sarah thrived in the routine. The child grew stronger, her cheeks filling out, her laughter coming more freely. She followed Talon around like a small shadow, endlessly fascinated by everything he did. He tolerated her presence with remarkable patience, occasionally carving small toys for her, a horse, a bear, a bird. Clara watched their interactions with a mixture of gratitude and something more complicated, something that reminded her Sarah would grow up without a father, and this quiet, patient man was the closest thing she had to a male figure in her life. 2 weeks after the storm, Clara woke to find fresh blood on her sleeping furs. Panic seized her immediately. She sat up, hands flying to her belly, terror flooding her veins. The baby, something was wrong with the baby. She was losing it, losing this last piece of Thomas, losing everything again. "Clara." Talon's voice cut through her rising hysteria. She looked up to find him kneeling beside her, his expression calm but alert. "What happened?" he asked. I'm bleeding. The baby. Her voice broke. I can't lose this baby. I can't. Let me see. Clara hesitated, then shifted enough for Talon to examine the blood on the furs. He studied it carefully, then looked at her with something that might have been relief. Not much blood. No cramping? Clara took stock of her body. No cramping. Just blood. The baby moves still? She pressed her hand to her belly, waiting. After a moment, she felt the familiar flutter of movement. Yes, it's moving. Then likely not serious. Sometimes women spot during pregnancy, especially after hard travel, cold, stress. He stood and moved to his supplies, returning with a bundle of dried leaves. I will make tea. You will rest today. No work. But the traps, I will check them. You rest. His tone left no room for argument. If the bleeding gets worse, if you cramp, you tell me immediately. Clara nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. Talon prepared the tea, something bitter that smelled of earth and green things, and made her drink all of it. Then he left with Sarah, taking the child with him so Clara could rest undisturbed. She lay alone in the shelter, one hand on her belly, feeling the baby move occasionally beneath her palm. Fear still churned in her stomach, but Talon's calm competence had taken the edge off her panic. He'd seen this before, had known not to worry. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to trust his judgment. When Talon returned hours later with Sarah and 4 rabbits, the bleeding had stopped. Better? He asked. Better. No more blood since this morning. Good. He set about preparing the rabbits. You still rest today. Tomorrow we see. Clara wanted to argue, but recognized the wisdom in caution. She spent the day playing quietly with Sarah, working on the deer hide Talon had given her to soften, and trying not to imagine all the ways this fragile new life could go wrong. By evening, she felt well enough to help with dinner preparation. Talon watched her carefully, ready to intervene if she showed signs of distress. But Clara moved through the task steadily. The baby continued to move normally. The bleeding didn't return. You were scared this morning, Talon observed as they ate. Of course I was scared. This baby is all I have left of my husband. You have more than that. You have his daughter. You have yourself. Talon fed a piece of meat to Sarah. The baby is important, but you would survive losing it. The bluntness stung, but Clara recognized the truth in it. I don't want to survive it. I want to bring it into the world healthy. Then rest when you need rest. Do not push your body beyond what it can do. He met her gaze across the fire. Strength is knowing your limits, not ignoring them. Clara absorbed the lesson. She'd spent so much time proving she could keep up, could work, could contribute, that she'd forgotten to listen to what her body actually needed. Pregnancy demanded different calculations, different compromises. I'll be more careful, she promised. Good. The incident shifted something between them, a new awareness of the stakes involved, the fragility beneath their developing routine. Talon became more watchful, more protective in subtle ways. He took on the heavier work without being asked, brought her extra portions of meat, made sure she rested adequately. Clara accepted the care without protest, recognizing it for what it was, not pity, but practical concern for someone carrying a child through difficult circumstances. As December deepened into January, the cold intensified. Snow fell regularly, accumulating in drifts that reached Clara's waist in places. The world contracted to the shelter, the immediate area around it, and the trap lines Talon checked religiously. Clara learned to move through deep snow, to dress in layers that trapped warmth, to recognize the warning signs of frostbite and hypothermia. She also learned to cook over open flame, to preserve meat by smoking it, to mend clothing with sinew and bone needles. Her hands grew calloused, her body stronger despite her pregnancy. She could skin a rabbit now almost as quickly as Talon, could set a snare, could start a fire even with damp wood. The skills accumulated slowly but steadily, each one a small victory against helplessness. Sarah learned too, in her own way. The child could navigate the shelter confidently now, knew to stay away from the fire, understood basic commands. She'd picked up a few Apache words from listening to Talon sing quietly while he worked. Simple things like water and food and sleep. Clara didn't mind. The child needed language, any language, and Talon's quiet presence was shaping her daughter in ways both practical and profound. One evening in late January, Clara sat working on a rabbit hide while Talon carved something from a piece of pine. Sarah had finally fallen asleep after an energetic day, and the shelter felt particularly peaceful. Clara's belly had grown noticeably larger, her movements more careful, but the baby remained active and healthy. "Talon," she said, breaking the comfortable silence, "what will happen when the baby comes?" He looked up from his carving. "What do you mean?" "I mean practically. I've never given birth before. Sarah was born with a midwife and doctor attending, in a proper bed with my husband beside me. Here," she gestured around the shelter, "here there's just me and you. What if something goes wrong?" Talon set down his carving, giving her his full attention. "I have delivered foals, calves, helped with difficult births and animals. I assisted when my son was born, though the women did most of the work. But I'm not a horse or a cow. No, but birth is birth. The body knows what to do. My job is to help, not to control." He paused. "There are plants that ease pain, that slow bleeding, that help the womb contract after. I know these plants, and I have delivered a human child before." Clara felt some of her anxiety ease. "You have?" "Yes. 2 years ago, a settler woman came through the hollow. She was traveling with her husband to Oregon, went into labor early. They stopped here." Talon picked up his carving again, his voice matter of fact. "The husband was useless. I helped. The child came healthy. They continued west 3 days later." "And the woman? She was all right?" "She was strong, like you." He met Clara's eyes. "You will be all right, too. When the time comes, I will help. The baby will come. You will survive. That is how it happens." His certainty should have seemed arrogant, but instead Clara found it comforting. Talon didn't deal in false reassurances or empty promises. He stated what he believed to be true based on experience, and his confidence became something she could lean on. "I'm afraid," she admitted quietly. "Fear is wise. It makes you careful. But do not let it control you." Talon returned to his carving, the knife moving in steady, practiced strokes. "When my wife went into labor, I was terrified. But fear did not help her. Being present helped. Being useful helped. Being calm helped." "What if I can't be calm?" "Then you scream, you cry, you curse me and your dead husband and the world. But your body will do the work regardless." He held up the carving, a small cradle, roughly formed but recognizable. "I am making this for when the child comes. Something to keep it safe while you rest." Clara's throat tightened. The gesture was so unexpected, so thoughtful, that she didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. Talon had no obligation to prepare for her child's arrival, no reason to invest time and effort into something that would benefit someone else's family. Yet here he sat, carving a cradle with the same quiet focus he brought to everything. "That's very kind," she managed. "It is practical. Babies need somewhere to sleep." Clara smiled despite the tears threatening to fall. "Still, thank you." Talon nodded once and continued carving. Clara watched his hands shape the wood, watched the cradle slowly take form, and felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the tight knot of fear she'd carried since Thomas died. She wasn't alone. Even here, in the middle of wilderness, in a shelter built into a hillside by a man she'd known less than 2 months, she wasn't alone. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if agreeing. Outside, wind howled through the trees, carrying fresh snow on its breath. But inside the shelter, fire burned warm and steady. Sarah slept peacefully on soft furs, and Talon carved a cradle for a child that wasn't his with the same care he brought to his own survival. Clara rested her hand on her belly and let herself imagine spring, not with fear this time, but with something that felt almost like anticipation. Winter would end eventually. The baby would come. And somehow, in this hollow, carved from wilderness and necessity, she would find a way to build a life worth living. February arrived with a cold so fierce it seemed to crack the world open. Clara woke one morning to find frost patterns blooming on the inside of the hide covering the entrance, delicate and beautiful and terrifying in what they represented. Even with the fire burning constantly, the temperature inside the shelter hovered just above freezing. Talon had anticipated this. Over the previous weeks, he'd reinforced the shelter's walls with additional hides and packed snow around the exterior for insulation. He'd moved their sleeping area closer to the fire and created a smaller enclosed space using suspended furs to trap heat more effectively. Clara marveled at his preparation, at the way he seemed to think 3 steps ahead of every challenge the season presented. "This is the hardest part of winter," he said that morning, banking the fire carefully. "The deep cold. It will last 2, maybe 3 weeks. Then it breaks." "And if it doesn't break?" Clara asked, pulling Sarah closer beneath the furs. Her daughter shivered despite the layers wrapped around her small body. "It always breaks. Eventually." Talon pulled on his heaviest furs. "I must check the near traps. Keep the fire high while I am gone. Do not let it die." "I won't." He paused at the entrance, looking back at them. "If something happens, if I do not return by dark, there is food in the cache. Enough for a month if you are careful. Stay inside. Stay warm. Do not try to find me." The word sent ice through Clara's veins, colder than the February air. "Nothing's going to happen." "Probably not, but you should know, in case." He pushed through the hide covering and disappeared into the white. Clara spent the day feeding the fire and trying not to imagine all the ways Talon might not return. A fall through ice, an encounter with a mountain lion or bear, simple cold that stole breath and consciousness before help could arrive. She'd grown dependent on him in ways she hadn't fully acknowledged until faced with his potential absence, and the realization unsettled her. Sarah sensed her mother's anxiety and grew fretful, whining and clinging in a way she hadn't done in weeks. Clara tried to distract her with the wooden toys Talon had made, with songs and stories, but the child remained inconsolable. By afternoon, Clara's own nerves were frayed nearly to breaking. When the hide covering finally shifted and Talon stepped through, Clara nearly cried with relief. He looked half frozen, ice crusted in his hair and eyebrows, his movements stiff with cold. He carried 3 rabbits and what looked like a small deer strapped to his back. He dropped the game near the entrance and moved immediately to the fire, crouching close to the flames with his hands extended. "You're all right," Clara said, stating the obvious because she needed to hear it confirmed. "Cold. Not injured." His teeth chattered slightly. "Found the deer caught in a deadfall. Fresh. Too valuable to leave." Clara heated broth and pressed the cup into his hands, watching him drink it in slow sips. Color gradually returned to his face. After 20 minutes by the fire, he stopped shivering and began the process of removing his outer layers, each stiff with ice. "That was dangerous," Clara said quietly. "Going out in this cold. We need food. The traps do not check themselves." "We have food in the cache. You said so yourself." Talon looked at her, his expression difficult to read. "The cache is for emergency, for when hunting is impossible." Today hunting was only hard. He returned his attention to the fire. "There is difference between hard and impossible. I do not confuse the two." Clara wanted to argue, to tell him the risk wasn't worth it, but she understood the logic even if she didn't like it. Every piece of fresh meat they harvested now meant the cache would last longer when, hunting became truly impossible. Talon was thinking ahead, protecting their survival with the same methodical planning he brought to everything. Still, watching him thaw by the fire, Clara felt something shift in her chest. Fear, yes, but also something warmer. Gratitude that he'd returned, relief that he was safe, and underneath both, a deeper emotion she wasn't quite ready to examine. The deep cold lasted 18 days. 18 days when stepping outside meant immediate pain, when breath froze in lungs, when the world compressed to the shelter and the fire, and the small circle of warmth they maintained through constant vigilance. Talon ventured out only when absolutely necessary, and never for long. They rationed the fresh meat carefully, supplementing with dried stores and whatever small game Talon could trap near the shelter. Clara's belly continued to grow, the baby increasingly active as her due date approached. She'd lost track of the exact timing, somewhere in late March or early April, she thought, but her body gave clear signals that birth wasn't far off. Her back ached constantly, she tired easily. Simple tasks left her breathless. Talon noticed, of course. He took over more of the work without comment, letting Clara rest when she needed it. He carved continuously during the long, cold days, not just the cradle, which was now nearly finished, but small figures for Sarah, a new knife handle, repairs to the shelter's framework. His hands were never idle, always creating something useful from available materials. One evening, Clara woke from a doze to find him working on something different. Not wood this time, but fabric, or rather, hide. He sat cross-legged by the fire with several rabbit pelts spread before him, a bone needle and sinew thread in his hands. "What are you making?" she asked, shifting carefully to ease the pressure on her lower back. "Blanket. For the baby." Talon didn't look up from his stitching. Rabbit fur is soft, warm, good for newborns. Clara watched him work, saw the careful precision in each stitch, the way he tested the seams for strength. "You've done this before." "For my son." His mother was pleased. A ghost of memory crossed his face. "He was born in autumn. The blanket kept him warm through his first winter." "What was his name?" Talon's hand stilled briefly on the fur. "Ashki. It means boy in my language." "That's beautiful." "It was a good name for a good child." He resumed stitching, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. He laughed easily, loved to explore, was always trying to catch birds with his small hands. A pause. He would have been 5 winters now. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, mourning a child she'd never known, understanding the shape of Talon's loss in a way only another parent could. "I'm sorry he didn't get to grow up." "I am too. Every day." Talon tied off a section of stitching and examined his work critically. "But grief does not bring him back. So I remember him with love instead of only pain. Make blankets for other children. Try to find purpose in what remains." The simple honesty of it struck Clara deeply. Talon didn't hide from his grief or pretend it didn't exist. He'd integrated it into who he was, let it shape him without destroying him. There was wisdom in that approach, a kind of strength Clara was still learning to access. "This baby is lucky to have you watching over it," she said softly. "The baby is lucky to have a mother who fights to keep it safe." Talon resumed stitching. "Many women would have given up in that storm. You did not. I had Sarah to protect. That made the choice simple. Loving someone makes many hard things simple." He held up the partially completed blanket, checking the drape. "This is why we survive. Not for ourselves alone, but for those who depend on us." Clara understood that truth intimately. She'd survived the journey west, not because she wanted to live, but because Sarah needed her to. Now she carried another life that would depend on her completely, and that dependence created purpose where purpose had felt lost. The baby kicked hard against Clara's ribs, and she gasped slightly at the force of it. Talon looked up immediately. "You are well?" "Fine. Just enthusiastic movement." Clara rubbed the spot where tiny feet had connected with her rib cage. "This one's going to be active." "Good. Active babies are healthy babies." Talon returned to his stitching. "When the time comes, you remember, let your body lead. Do not fight the pain. Use it. Ride it like a river. Fighting makes everything harder. That's easy to say when you're not the one in labor." "True. But I watched my wife. The moment she fought the pain, she struggled. The moment she surrendered to it, worked with it, things progressed." He knotted another section of sinew. "Your body knows how to birth a child. Trust it." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that her body would know what to do when the moment came. But fear still lurked beneath the surface, fear of complications, of something going wrong, of losing this baby or herself in the process. Birth was dangerous even with doctors and midwives attending. Out here, with only Talon's rough frontier knowledge, the risks multiplied. As if sensing her thoughts, Talon set down the blanket and met her gaze across the fire. "Clara, you're strong. You walked through a blizzard pregnant and carrying a child. You learned to survive in wilderness in the middle of winter. You skin rabbits and set traps and keep a fire burning through the coldest nights." He paused, his dark eyes intense. "Birth is hard, but you are harder. You will survive it." The conviction in his voice made Clara's throat tight. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I have seen what you do when you have no choice. You endure, you adapt, you protect what matters." Talon picked up the blanket again. "The baby will come. You will scream and bleed and suffer. and then it will be over, and you will have a new child, and you will keep living. That is how it happens. Clara nodded, trying to absorb his certainty to make it her own. Outside, wind howled through the trees, but inside the shelter felt warm and safe, a small pocket of survival carved from hostile wilderness through determination and skill. If she could survive everything that had led her here, perhaps she could survive what came next. The deep cold finally broke in late February, the temperature climbing enough that breathing outside no longer felt like inhaling knives. Talon immediately set about replenishing their supplies, ranging further from the shelter now that movement was possible again. He returned each evening with game, deer, rabbit, grouse, once even a young elk that provided meat for weeks. Clara helped process everything he brought, her skills now developed enough that she could work efficiently, even with her swollen belly making movement awkward. Sarah played nearby, chattering constantly in her mixed vocabulary of English and Apache words, creating elaborate stories with her wooden toys. In early March, the first hints of thaw appeared. Water dripped from branches. Snow began to melt in sunny patches. The world slowly emerged from winter's grip, brown and muddy, but alive. Clara felt her spirits lift with the changing season, felt hope kindle, like the first green shoots that would soon push through the softening earth. One afternoon, she stood outside the shelter, breathing spring air and feeling the baby shift and roll inside her. Any day now, she thought. Any day this child would decide to arrive, and everything would change again. The thought brought equal parts anticipation and terror. Clara? She turned to find Talon approaching from the trap line, but his expression stopped her breath. Something was wrong, not danger exactly, but disturbance. He held a rabbit in one hand and something else in the other, something that made his jaw tight. "What is it?" she asked. He held out his other hand. A scrap of cloth lay across his palm, dirty and torn but recognizable. Calico fabric, the kind used for dresses. And beside it, a small leather button. Clara's heart began to pound. "Where did you find those?" "Near the eastern trap line. There are tracks too. Boot prints. Recent." Talon's eyes scanned the tree line with new wariness. "Someone passed through the hollow. Maybe yesterday, maybe this morning." "Who? Prospectors? Settlers?" "I do not know. The tracks head west, but they came close to our shelter. Too close." Closed his fist around the cloth and button. "We should be careful." Clara felt fear slide cold down her spine. For months they'd existed in complete isolation, just the three of them in their small world. The idea of strangers nearby disrupted that fragile safety. "What do we do?" "Watch. Listen. I will check the far perimeters more often." Talon looked at her belly, at Sarah playing nearby. "You stay close to the shelter. Do not wander, even to gather wood. If you see anyone at all, you come inside immediately and wait for me." "You think they're dangerous?" "I think I do not know who they are or what they want. That makes them dangerous until proven otherwise." He moved toward the shelter. "Come inside. I want to prepare." For the next 3 days, tension hung over the hollow like smoke. Talon checked the perimeters constantly, returning with reports of tracks that came and went but never approached directly. Someone, or multiple someones, were definitely moving through the area, but their purpose remained unclear. Clara tried to stay calm for Sarah's sake, but anxiety gnawed at her constantly. She was too pregnant to run, too slow to defend herself if needed, and Sarah was just a baby, vulnerable and innocent. If danger came, their options were limited. On the 4th day, Talon found more evidence: a campfire site recently used, and the carcass of a deer, stripped of meat but left carelessly. Boot prints suggested at least 3 people, maybe more. "They are not experienced," Talon said, examining the site with Clara behind him. "They waste food, make obvious camps, leave clear trails. Either very stupid or very desperate." "Which is worse?" Clara asked. "Desperate. Stupid people can be avoided. Desperate people are unpredictable." He stood, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "We should prepare for the possibility they find us." Back at the shelter, Talon gathered supplies: knives, a hatchet, the rifle he rarely touched. He showed Clara how to bar the entrance from inside, how to create a smoke signal if she needed help, where to hide if strangers approached while he was out. "You are frightening me,"
Clara said, watching him work. Good. Fear makes you careful. Careful keeps you alive. He checked the rifle's mechanism, ensuring it would fire if needed. I do not think they will bother us. We have nothing they want, but I prepare for the worst and hope for the best. That night, Clara lay awake listening to every sound, every crack of settling wood, every whisper of wind through pine needles.
Sarah slept peacefully beside her, and Clara envied her daughter's innocence, her inability to understand the danger that might be circling just beyond their small sphere of warmth and safety. Talon sat by the fire, the rifle across his knees, watching the entrance with the patient stillness of a hunter. Clara found unexpected comfort in his vigilance, in knowing he would defend them if it came to that. She'd never asked him to take on that responsibility, but he'd assumed it anyway, protecting them as thoroughly as he protected the cache or the trap lines, because they were his to protect. And he took that duty seriously. The baby kicked hard, and Clara gasped softly. Talon's eyes shifted to her immediately. You are well. Just movement. Strong movement. Clara pressed her hand to her belly. I think this one wants out. Soon. Talon's expression softened slightly. Soon the baby comes, and you have new worries to replace the old ones. Clara almost smiled. Is that supposed to be comforting? It is truth. You cannot control who walks through these woods. You can control how you prepare, how you respond. Focus on what you can control. He added wood to the fire. And right now, you can control resting. Sleep while you can. I will watch. Clara wanted to argue, to share the burden of vigilance, but exhaustion pulled at her bones. She settled back against the furs, one hand on her belly, and let her eyes close. Sleep came faster than expected, dragging her down into darkness where strangers and danger couldn't follow. She woke to chaos. The shelter was in motion, Talon moving fast, Sarah crying, voices outside she didn't recognize. Clara struggled upright, disoriented and clumsy, her pregnant body protesting the sudden movement. Stay down, Talon said sharply, pressing her shoulder. Do not show yourself. What's happening? The strangers. 3 men. They saw my smoke and came to investigate. Talon positioned himself between Clara and the entrance, the rifle ready but not yet raised. Let me handle this, a voice called from outside, rough and demanding. Hey in there! We know you're occupied. Come out and let's talk like civilized folks. Talon exchanged a look with Clara, then called back in English, heavily accented but clear. What do you want? Just to talk, friend. We've been traveling hard and could use some help. Maybe some food if you can spare it. I have little to spare. Come now. We can see you've been doing all right out here. That's a fine shelter. Must have good trapping. A pause. We're not looking for trouble. Just a hot meal and maybe some information about the country west of here. Talon's jaw tightened. Clara could see him weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he made a decision. I will come out, but my rifle comes with me. Wouldn't expect otherwise. Talon looked at Clara one more time. Keep Sarah quiet. Stay hidden. If something happens, if I do not come back, you know what to do. Before Clara could respond, he pushed through the hide covering and was gone. Clara immediately pulled Sarah close, covering the child's mouth gently when she started to cry. She could hear voices outside, Talon steady and measured, the strangers more animated. She couldn't make out specific words, just tone and rhythm. The conversation seemed relatively civil, at least initially. Then something changed. The voices grew sharper, more aggressive. Clara heard one of the men laugh, not a friendly sound, and another make a comment that carried clear threat even if the words were indistinct. Talon's voice remained calm but harder now, steel beneath the courtesy. More laughter from the strangers. Then footsteps, moving away. Clara held her breath, Sarah squirming slightly in her arms. Long minutes passed. The voices faded into the distance. Finally, the hide covering shifted and Talon stepped back inside. His expression was dark, anger simmering beneath his usual calm. What happened? Clara asked immediately. They wanted food. I gave them dried meat, told them the western passes are still blocked by snow. He set the rifle down with controlled precision. They asked if I was alone. I said no, I had family inside. One of them made a comment about Indian hospitality. Another asked if my squaw was pretty. Clara's blood chilled. What did you say? I told them my wife was not their concern. Suggested they move on before the weather turned again. Talon's hands flexed at his sides. They laughed, said maybe they'd come back, see if I was more generous after thinking it over. They're coming back? Fear spiked sharp in Clara's chest. Maybe. Maybe they were only trying to frighten me, but I do not trust them. Talon began gathering supplies with quick efficiency. We need to be ready. If they return, if they try to force their way in, I will stop them. But you need to know what to do if I cannot. For the next hour, Talon taught Clara how to fire the rifle, how to load it, aim it, brace for the recoil. She practiced with an empty chamber, getting used to the weight, the mechanism. Her pregnant belly made positioning awkward, but she managed. If they come when I am not here, Talon said, his voice urgent, you bar the entrance. You do not open it for anyone. If they try to break in, you fire through the gap. Aim low. Do not hesitate. I've never shot anyone. If it comes to that, you will not be shooting a person. You will be shooting a threat to your children. His eyes bored into hers. You understand? You protect Sarah and the baby. Nothing else matters. Clara nodded, throat tight. I understand. They spent the rest of the day fortifying the shelter, reinforcing the entrance, preparing weapons and positioning them where Clara could reach them quickly. Sarah sensed the tension and stayed close to her mother, her small face serious in a way that broke Clara's heart. Night fell without the strangers returning, but neither Clara nor Talon slept. They took turns watching, listening for footsteps that never came. By dawn, exhaustion made everything feel surreal, but the hollow remained quiet. The second day passed the same way, and the third. By the fourth day, Clara began to hope the men had moved on, had found what they needed elsewhere, or simply lost interest in harassing an isolated Apache hunter. Then, on the fifth day, everything changed. Clara was alone in the shelter with Sarah. Talon had gone to check the distant trap lines despite her protests. She was preparing rabbit meat for dinner when pain lanced through her abdomen, sharp and unmistakable. The baby was coming. Clara dropped the knife, her hand flying to her belly as another contraction gripped her. Not now, she thought desperately. Not when Talon's gone and those men could still be out there. Not now. But her body didn't care about timing or convenience. The contraction tightened like a fist around her middle, held for a long count of 10, then slowly released. Clara breathed through it, trying to remember everything Talon had told her. Let the body lead. Don't fight it. Ride it like a river. Sarah looked up from her toys, sensing something wrong. Mama? It's all right, sweetheart. Clara forced her voice steady, despite the fear clawing at her throat. The baby's decided it's time to come meet us. Another contraction hit before she'd fully recovered from the first. Clara gasped and gripped the edge of the wooden table Talon had built, her knuckles white. Too fast. This was happening too fast. First babies were supposed to take time, hours and hours of slow progression. But this child seemed determined to arrive with the same stubborn urgency that had characterized Clara's entire journey west. She needed to prepare, needed to get ready before the pain made thinking impossible. Clara looked around the shelter with new eyes, assessing what she'd need. Water. There was a pot already warming by the fire. Clean furs for the baby to lie on. Talon had set those aside weeks ago. The blanket he'd sewn from rabbit pelts. Strips of cloth for cutting the cord. A sharp knife, cleaned and ready. The items were all there, all prepared, because Talon had thought ahead even when Clara had been too afraid to plan. She felt a rush of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. He'd made this possible. He'd given her everything she needed, except himself. She needed him here, needed his calm presence and steady hands and the confidence he carried like armor. But he was miles away checking trap lines, unaware that the baby had decided today was the day. Another contraction. Clara counted. Barely 3 minutes since the last one. This was moving fast. Too fast. She managed to drag the pile of clean furs closer to the fire, creating a makeshift birthing area. Sarah watched with wide eyes, her wooden bird forgotten. Clara knew she needed to keep her daughter occupied, needed to prevent the child from being frightened by what was about to happen. Sarah, baby, I need you to do something very important for Mama. Clara knelt with difficulty, meeting her daughter's eyes. I need you to sit right here by the fire and play with your toys. Can you do that? Can you be very brave and very good? Sarah nodded solemnly, sensing the gravity in her mother's tone. That's my girl. Clara kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the sweet smell of her hair. Everything's going to be fine. You're going to have a baby brother or sister very soon. The next contraction hit harder than the others, dropping Clara to her hands and knees. She heard herself moan, a low animal sound she couldn't control. The pain was enormous, consuming, unlike anything she'd experienced even with Sarah's birth. Then she'd had laudanum and comfort and women's voices coaching her through. Now she had only firelight and fear and the distant hope that Talon would return before it was too late. But the baby wasn't waiting. Clara felt the pressure building, felt her body preparing to push whether she was ready or not. She struggled out of her lower clothing, moving on pure instinct now. The rabbit pelt blanket cushioned her knees. The fire burned hot on her left side. Sarah hummed quietly to herself, mercifully distracted. Clara braced herself against the shelter wall as another contraction rolled through. This time she felt the baby move, felt the inexorable progress of new life forcing its way into the world. Her body knew exactly what to do, even if her mind screamed that she wasn't ready, that she couldn't do this alone, that she needed help. Please, she whispered, though she didn't know who she was asking. Please let Talon come back. Please let this be okay. Please. The wind answered by picking up outside, howling through the trees with a sound like wolves crying. Clara shuddered and bore down as her body demanded, feeling the baby shift lower. Sweat poured down her face despite the March cold. She'd never felt so alone, so utterly dependent on forces beyond her control. Time lost meaning. There was only pain and pressure and the desperate animal drive to survive, to bring this child into the world alive. Clara lost count of the contractions, lost track of how long she'd been laboring. Could have been an hour, could have been 3. The world compressed to the next breath, the next push, the next moment of endurance. Then she heard it, footsteps outside. Heavy boots crunching through snow. Clara's heart seized. Talon moved silently, his footsteps barely audible even when approaching directly. These were the steps of men who didn't care about stealth, who wanted to be heard. The strangers had returned. Well, now looks like smoke still rising from that shelter, the voice carried clearly through the hide covering. Reckon that engine's home. Only one way to find out. Different voice, rougher. Maybe his woman's around. Be neighborly to check on them. Laughter, cruel and knowing. Clara's blood turned to ice. She was in active labor, barely coherent with pain, completely vulnerable. Sarah sat frozen by the fire, her eyes huge with fear. The rifle leaned against the wall 10 feet away, loaded and ready. But Clara didn't know if she could reach it, let alone fire it accurately in her current state. Another contraction hit, and Clara bit down on her hand to keep from crying out. She couldn't let them know she was here alone. Couldn't let them hear her weakness. Hey! One of the men pounded on the rock beside the entrance. Anybody home? We brought whiskey this time. Thought we might share, bury the hatchet from our last visit. Clara held her breath, held absolutely still despite the agony ripping through her abdomen. Sarah's eyes found hers across the shelter, and Clara put a finger to her lips. Quiet. Stay quiet, baby girl. Maybe they ain't here. Third voice, younger. Could be out hunting or some such. In that case, wouldn't be rude of us to help ourselves to some warmth while we wait. Footsteps moved closer to the entrance. Hell, might even find something useful inside. The hide covering began to shift as someone pulled it aside. Clara's vision went white with pain and terror and something deeper than both. These men would not enter this shelter, would not threaten her daughter, would not touch her while she labored to bring new life into the world. Something primal rose in her chest, something that transcended fear and pain and civilized restraint. She grabbed the rifle. The movement cost her everything. Pain exploded through her pelvis as the baby shifted, and Clara nearly blacked out. But her hands found the stock, found the trigger, found the cold metal that represented the only thing standing between her family and men who meant them harm. The hide covering pulled back fully. A man's face appeared, bearded and grinning, eyes already scanning the interior. His grin faltered when he saw Clara, half naked, streaked with sweat and blood, pointing a rifle directly at his chest with hands that shook but didn't waver. Jesus Christ, he breathed. She's... Get out. Clara's voice came out raw, barely human. Get away from here or I swear I'll shoot you. Now hold on, ma'am. We didn't mean no... I said get out! Clara thumbed back the hammer, the click loud in the sudden silence. You've got 3 seconds before I pull this trigger. The man raised his hands, backing away from the entrance. All right, we're leaving. No need for violence. Tell your friends. Tell them if any of you come near this shelter again, I will kill you. I don't care if you're lost or hungry or looking for directions. You come near my family and you die. Do you understand me? The man nodded rapidly, his eyes wide. He disappeared from view, and Clara heard urgent muttered conversation outside, footsteps retreating quickly through the snow. She held the rifle steady, listening for any indication they might try another approach, but the sounds faded into the distance until only the wind remained. Clara lowered the rifle with shaking hands and immediately doubled over as another contraction seized her. This one brought the baby crowning. She could feel it, feel the impossible stretch and burn. She had maybe minutes left before this child arrived, whether she was ready or not. She managed to set the rifle aside and position herself on the furs, breathing in ragged gasps. Sarah had started to cry, frightened by the men and her mother's transformation into something fierce and foreign. Clara wanted to comfort her but couldn't spare the focus, couldn't spare anything except the absolute concentration required to birth a baby alone in the wilderness. It's okay, baby, she managed between contractions. Mama's okay. Just stay there. Stay by the fire. The next push brought the baby's head fully into the world. Clara reached down and felt soft hair, felt the solid reality of her child partially born. One more push, maybe 2. She could do this. She'd survived everything else. She could survive this. She bore down with everything she had, felt something tear inside her but couldn't stop, couldn't do anything but push and scream and demand her body do what bodies had done since the beginning of time. The baby's shoulders emerged in a rush of fluid and blood, and then the rest followed in a slippery tumble onto the furs. Clara collapsed backward, gasping, her vision swimming. The baby lay still and silent between her legs, covered in blood and vernix, not breathing. No. After everything, after surviving the storm and the men and the labor itself, the baby couldn't be stillborn. Clara reached for her child with trembling hands, lifting the small body. A boy. She'd had a son. Breathe, she whispered urgently, rubbing his chest with her thumbs. Come on, baby. Breathe for me. Please breathe. Nothing. The baby lay limp in her hands, his color already turning gray. Clara's mind raced through everything she'd ever heard about stillborn babies, about revival attempts. She'd seen a midwife once blow gently into a newborn's mouth when it wouldn't breathe. Worth trying. Worth anything. She lifted her son's face to her lips and exhaled softly into his mouth, felt his tiny chest rise with borrowed air. Did it again and again, rubbing his back between breaths, stimulating, pleading with him to respond. Come on, she sobbed. Come on, Thomas. Wake up. You have to wake up. The name came without thought, her husband's name for her husband's son. She breathed into the baby's mouth again, tears streaming down her face, refusing to accept that she'd come this far, only to lose everything that mattered. The baby coughed. Clara's heart nearly stopped. She pulled back and the baby coughed again, then drew a shuddering breath on his own. His color shifted from gray to pink, his eyes scrunched closed and his mouth opened in a thin, angry wail. Oh, thank you, Clara gasped, pulling her son against her chest. Thank you, thank you, thank you. She held him close, feeling his heart beat against hers, feeling his chest rise and fall with independent breath. He was alive, small but alive, breathing and crying and absolutely perfect. Clara realized distantly that she was still bleeding, that the afterbirth needed to come, that she should probably be doing something about the umbilical cord. But she couldn't make herself care about anything except the miracle of her son breathing in her arms. Everything else could wait. That's when she heard the second set of footsteps outside. Quiet this time. Deliberate. Clara's free hand shot to the rifle even as terror clenched her chest. The strangers had returned. She'd have to shoot them, would have to kill to protect her children. She pulled the baby tighter against her and raised the rifle one-handed, pointing it at the entrance. The hide covering shifted, and Talon stepped through. He took in the scene in one comprehensive glance, Clara half naked and covered in blood, the baby in her arms, the rifle pointed at his chest, Sarah crying by the fire. His expression shifted from surprise to understanding to something Clara couldn't quite identify. Clara. His voice was impossibly gentle. You can lower the rifle. It is me. Clara's hands started shaking so badly she nearly dropped the weapon. Talon crossed the shelter in 2 strides and took it from her, setting it carefully aside. Then he knelt beside her, his eyes on the baby. A son, she whispered. I had a son. I can see that. Talon reached out slowly, giving Clara time to refuse, and touched the baby's cheek with one careful finger. He breathes well, strong lungs. He wasn't breathing at first. I had to... Clara's voice broke. I thought I'd lost him. But you did not. You brought him back. Talon shifted his attention to Clara herself, his expression darkening as he noted the blood, the torn flesh, the evidence of trauma. You are injured. We need to stop the bleeding. The afterbirth hasn't come yet. It will, but first we make sure you survive to see it. Talon moved with efficient purpose, heating water, gathering clean cloth. Can you tell me what happened? I saw boot prints outside. Recent. The strangers came back. Clara's teeth had started chattering, shock finally setting in. They tried to come inside. I pointed the rifle at them, told them I'd shoot if they came near us again. Talon's hands stilled briefly on the cloth he was preparing. You faced them down while in labor? I didn't have a choice. They were going to come in. I had to protect Sarah. Clara looked at her daughter, who had stopped crying and now watched everything with solemn eyes. I had to protect both of them. Yes. Talon's voice carried something Clara had never heard before. Profound respect, maybe even awe. Yes, you did. And you succeeded. He helped Clara deliver the afterbirth, checked to make sure it was complete, then set about cleaning and bandaging her with the same methodical care he brought to everything. The baby, Thomas, she'd already named him in her heart, continued to wail lustily, announcing his arrival to the world. He is loud, Talon observed, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly. This is good. Quiet babies worry me. Clara laughed despite everything, the sound edged with hysteria. I don't think we'll have that problem. Talon finished with the bandaging and reached for the baby. May I? Clara hesitated only a moment before transferring her son into Talon's capable hands. He held Thomas with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this before, supporting the head, checking fingers and toes, examining the baby with gentle thoroughness. He is small, but healthy, all parts present and working. Talon wrapped Thomas in the rabbit fur blanket he'd spent weeks creating. He will need to eat soon. Your body knows how to feed him. I will help with everything else. Clara's eyes filled with tears again, not from pain this time, but from overwhelming gratitude. Talon had appeared exactly when she needed him, had taken control of the situation without judgment or panic, had treated her and her newborn son with a tenderness that made her chest ache. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for being here, for helping, for... You do not need to thank me. Talon settled Thomas back into Clara's arms. This is what family does. We help each other survive. The word hung in the air between them. Family. Not charity or obligation or temporary arrangement, but family. Clara looked at Talon across the firelight. This man who'd saved her from the storm, taught her to survive, delivered her son into the world. She looked at Sarah, who had already begun to relax now that Talon was home. She looked down at Thomas, still angry and red-faced, but alive, so miraculously alive. Family. Perhaps they were. Perhaps they'd become one without her quite noticing, bound together not by blood or law, but by shared survival and mutual dependence, and something deeper that Clara wasn't quite ready to name. Another contraction, gentler this time, reminded her that her body still had work to do. Talon helped her through it, helped clean her afterward, helped arrange the furs so she could rest comfortably with Thomas tucked against her chest. Sarah crept closer, curious about the new arrival. Baby, the toddler announced, pointing. Yes, sweetheart, this is your brother. His name is Thomas. Clara guided Sarah's hand to gently touch the baby's head. You have to be very careful with him.
He's still very small. Sarah stroked Thomas's hair with surprising gentleness, then looked up at Talon. Baby brother. Yes, baby brother, Talon added wood to the fire. You will help protect him, yes? Help keep him safe? Sarah nodded seriously, taking her new responsibility with the gravity only toddlers can manage. She settled beside Clara, one small hand resting possessively on Thomas's blanket. Talon prepared broth and brought it to Clara, making her drink despite her protests that she wasn't hungry. You lost blood. You need to replace it. Drink. Clara obeyed, too exhausted to argue. The warm broth settled in her stomach, and she realized she was actually starving, her body demanding fuel for the work it had just accomplished. She finished the cup and Talon immediately refilled it. Those men, he said quietly, his eyes on the fire. You said they tried to enter? They pulled back the covering. One of them looked inside. Clara shuddered at the memory. But when they saw me with the rifle, they ran. I don't think they'll come back. No, they will not. Talon's voice carried absolute certainty. I found their trail when I returned. Followed it far enough to be sure they were leaving the area. They ran like frightened rabbits. He looked at Clara with something that might have been pride. You put fear into them. That fear will keep them away. I didn't feel fearless. I felt terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is action despite fear. Talon stirred the fire. You acted when action was required. That is all courage ever is. Clara held Thomas closer, feeling his warmth, his reality. She'd done it, had faced down armed men while in labor, had delivered her own baby, had revived him when he wouldn't breathe. She'd survived things she'd never imagined surviving, had discovered strength she hadn't known she possessed. Talon, she said softly, earlier, when you came back, you called us family. He glanced at her, his expression carefully neutral. Did I? You did. And I... Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. I think you're right. I think we've become one. Not the family I planned or expected, but family nonetheless. Talon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion he usually kept buried. I told myself I would not care again. After my wife and son died, I decided caring brought only pain. It was safer to remain alone. He fed another stick to the fire. But then you came. You and Sarah, freezing in the snow, and I could not walk away, could not leave you to die when I could save you. I'm glad you didn't. I am too. Even though caring makes me vulnerable again, makes me afraid of loss again. Talon looked at her directly, his dark eyes intense. You and Sarah, and now Thomas. You have become what I tried not to want. You have become people I would protect with my life, people I would mourn if I lost. You have become my family, Clara Whitmore, and I find I do not regret it. Clara's throat closed around words she couldn't quite speak. The confession hung between them, honest and raw, acknowledging what had been growing between them for months. Not romance, nothing so simple, but connection, partnership. The deep bonds formed when survival depends on trust and presence and steady care. Thomas chose that moment to start rooting against Clara's chest, his small mouth searching for food. Talon tactfully turned his attention to Sarah, engaging the toddler with questions about her wooden toys, while Clara awkwardly figured out how to nurse. The baby latched immediately, his instincts functioning perfectly, even if Clara's technique was uncertain. Pain lanced through her torn flesh as Thomas fed, but Clara gritted her teeth and endured it. This was motherhood. Blood and pain and exhaustion mixed with love so fierce it bordered on violence. She'd do anything for this child, for both her children. Would face down armed men, would survive impossible circumstances, would learn to thrive in wilderness if that's what it took to keep them safe. The storm that had been building outside finally broke, rain drumming against the shelter's roof in a spring deluge. Clara listened to it and thought about the storm that had driven her here months ago, about how desperate and hopeless she'd felt then. She'd thought she was running toward death. Instead, she'd stumbled into life, messy and complicated and nothing like she'd planned, but life nonetheless. Thomas fell asleep at her breast, milk-drunk and content. Sarah dozed against her side. Talon sat across the fire, working on some small project in the firelight,
his presence as steady and reliable as the earth itself. Outside, rain washed the hollow clean, promising green growth and new beginnings. Clara closed her eyes and let herself rest, surrounded by the family she'd found in the wilderness, protected by walls built from stone and hide and stubborn determination. She'd survived. More than survived, she'd endured and adapted and become someone new, someone stronger, someone who belonged exactly where she was. Spring arrived properly in the weeks following Thomas's birth, transforming the hollow from white silence into green abundance. Clara watched the change from inside the shelter during those early days of recovery, her body slowly healing from the trauma of childbirth, while Thomas nursed and slept against her chest in the endless cycle of newborn life. Talon took over everything, checking traps, hunting, gathering early greens that pushed through the softening earth, cooking, caring for Sarah, maintaining the fire. He moved through tasks with quiet efficiency, never complaining about the extra burden, never suggesting Clara wasn't pulling her weight. When she apologized for being useless, he simply looked at her with those dark, steady eyes. You grew a human being inside your body, then brought him into the world while facing armed men. You are many things, Clara Whitmore, but useless is not one of them. He handed her a cup of strong tea. Rest, heal, that is your work now. So she rested, though it chafed against her nature to remain idle. She watched Talon teach Sarah to identify edible plants, watched him carve new tools from green wood, watched him expand the shelter to accommodate their growing family. Because that's what they were now, not three separate people sharing space, but a family bound by survival and choice, and something deeper neither of them had quite named aloud. By mid-April, Clara felt strong enough to venture outside for short periods. The world had transformed into something almost magical. Wildflowers blooming in impossible profusion, trees budding green, the sound of rushing water everywhere as snowmelt filled the creeks. She stood in sunlight with Thomas wrapped against her chest and felt something close to joy for the first time since before the hanging. It's beautiful, she said when Talon returned from checking the trap line. Yes, spring comes hard here, but when it comes completely. He set down 2 rabbits and a grouse. The land remembers how to live. Clara understood the metaphor wasn't really about the land. She looked at him, this man who'd buried his own family and built a life from grief and solitude, and saw someone who'd also remembered how to live. They'd both been frozen, both been surviving winter in more than just the literal sense. Now something was thawing, something fragile and new pushing toward the light. That evening, after Sarah had fallen asleep and Thomas dozed milk-drunk in his cradle, Clara worked up the courage to ask the question that had been growing in her mind for weeks. Talon, what happens now, when summer comes and traveling becomes easy again? He looked up from the deer hide he was working. What do you want to happen? I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Clara chose her words carefully. I came here with nowhere to go, nothing but desperation. You gave me shelter when I needed it, but I can't stay here forever taking advantage of your generosity. Who says you are taking advantage? I'm a widow with 2 children. I contribute what I can, but you do most of the work. That's not a partnership. That's charity. Talon set down the hide, giving her his full attention. You think feeding a newborn through the night is not work? You think keeping Sarah occupied so I can hunt is not contribution? You think the meat you preserved last month, the hides you tanned, the repairs you made to our clothing, you think these things have no value? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? His voice remained calm but carried an edge of something sharper. You think because you cannot trap or hunt, you are useless here? You think family is measured only in killed game and completed tasks? Claire's throat tightened. I think I need to know if I'm building a life here or just postponing a decision. I need to know what you want, Talon, not just what you're willing to tolerate. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crack and pop of the fire. Talon stood and moved to the entrance, looking out at the darkness. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession. When my wife died, I told myself I would never care for anyone again, that I would live alone until my own death, owing nothing and owed nothing in return. He paused. But you came, and Sarah, and now Thomas. And I find that I do not want you to leave. I want you to stay. I want to teach Sarah to set snares and Thomas to walk, and you to stop thinking you are a burden when you are anything but. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying? I am saying this is your home if you want it to be. Not as charity, not as temporary shelter, as home. He turned to face her, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. I am saying you are my family now, and I would like you to stay. All of you. For as long as you choose. And what would that make us? Clara asked softly. What would we be to each other? Whatever we decide to be. Talon crossed back to the fire, kneeling across from her. The whites have laws about marriage, about what makes a family legitimate. My people have different customs, but out here, those things matter less than what we choose to build together. He met her eyes steadily. I do not ask you to be my wife. I do not expect anything you do not freely offer, but I ask you to stay, to make this hollow our home together, to raise these children as ours, not mine or yours, but ours. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. I loved my husband. I'm not looking to replace him. I know. I do not ask you to forget him or to love me the way you loved him. Talon's voice gentled. But love takes many forms: partnership, friendship, shared purpose. These things are also valuable. These things can also build a life worth living. He was right. Clara had loved Thomas with the passionate certainty of youth, with romance and dreams and expectations. What she felt for Talon was different, steadier, quieter, built on mutual respect and shared survival rather than poetry. But it was real. And maybe it was enough. I want to stay, she said, finally. Not because I have nowhere else to go, because this is where I want to be. With you. Here. Something shifted in Talon's expression. Relief, maybe, or joy, tempered by the caution of someone who'd lost everything once and feared losing it again. He reached across the fire and took her hand, his calluses rough against her palm. Then stay. Build this life with me. We will plant gardens and raise children and survive whatever comes next. Together. Together, Claire repeated, and the word felt like a promise. They sat together in the firelight, hands clasped, while outside the spring night sang with new life and possibility. It wasn't the future Clara had imagined. But then, nothing about her life had gone according to plan. Sometimes the best futures were the ones you stumbled into sideways, the ones you built from survival and necessity and gradual choice. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Clara was nursing Thomas while Sarah played outside under Talon's watchful eye when she heard horses approaching. Fear spiked immediately, the strangers returning maybe, or new threats. She handed Thomas to the cradle and reached for the rifle that now lived within arm's reach at all times. But Talon appeared in the entrance, his expression puzzled rather than alarmed. 3 riders, well-dressed. They carry official papers. What kind of official papers? I do not know, but they do not look like the men who came before. These are different. He paused. One of them asked if a Clara Whitmore lives here. Clara's blood ran cold. Someone from Sterling? Someone come to cause more trouble, to blame her for crimes she hadn't committed? She set the rifle aside and stood on shaky legs, moving to the entrance. 3 men sat on horseback at the edge of the clearing, middle-aged, dressed in suits that looked absurdly formal against the wilderness backdrop. The one in front removed his hat when he saw Clara. Mrs. Whitmore? Mrs. Clara Whitmore? Widow of Thomas Whitmore? Who's asking? Clara kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. My name is Gerald Hutchins. I'm a territorial judge. He dismounted carefully, moving slowly as if approaching a spooked animal. I've been searching for you for nearly 2 months, ma'am. May I approach? Clara glanced at Talon, who gave a small nod. She stepped out of the shelter, holding herself tall despite her fear. What do you want with me? Judge Hutchins pulled papers from his saddlebag, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. I have news regarding your husband's case. May we speak? We can speak right here. The judge looked at his companions, then back at Clara. As you wish. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm here to inform you that your husband's conviction has been overturned. He's been posthumously pardoned. The world tilted. Clara gripped the shelter's frame to keep from falling. What? The real thief confessed. Man named Robert Sykes. Worked at the same lumber mill as your husband. He'd been stealing for months, using Thomas as a cover. When Sykes tried to flee to California, he got drunk in Denver and bragged to the wrong people. The marshal brought him back to Sterling. Hutchins' expression softened. He confessed to everything. Your husband was innocent, Mrs. Whitmore. He died an innocent man. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Thomas had been innocent. She'd known it, had believed it, but hearing official confirmation made something break open in her chest. He'd died for nothing, murdered by the state for a crime he didn't commit, while the real thief walked free. Why are you telling me this now? Her voice came out harsh, bitter. He's still dead. Knowing he was innocent doesn't bring him back. No, ma'am, it doesn't. But the territorial government recognizes a grave injustice was done. As restitution, they're offering you substantial compensation. Hutchins unfolded one of the papers. 200 acres of land in your choice of location, a cash settlement of $500, and a formal apology from the territorial governor. The numbers meant nothing. Clara stared at the judge, seeing only the rope, the courthouse steps, the moment her life had shattered beyond recognition. They think land and money makes up for killing my husband? No, ma'am, nothing makes up for that, but it's what they can offer. Hutchins held out the papers. The land deeds are already prepared. You just need to select a location and file the claim. The money's available immediately. I have a bank draft here. Clara looked at the papers without taking them. Land, money, official acknowledgement that Thomas had been murdered by people who were supposed to protect justice. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it felt like salt in wounds that hadn't yet finished healing. Where would I even claim land, she asked, more to herself than the judge. I have nowhere to go. Actually, ma'am, you're standing on unclaimed territory right now. Hutchins gestured to the hollow around them. This whole valley, Red Ridge, and about 300 acres surrounding it, hasn't been filed on. You could claim it if you wanted. Build a proper homestead here. Clara's breath caught. She looked at Talon, who stood silent and watchful, his expression carefully neutral. This hollow had been his refuge, his sanctuary built from grief and solitude. Now the government was offering it to her on paper, making legal what had only been occupation. This land is Talon's, she said firmly. He's lived here for 3 years, built this shelter, established trap lines, survived here. I can't just take it from him. With respect, ma'am, under territorial law, Indians can't hold land title. Hutchins' tone carried apology. I'm not saying it's right or fair, but that's the law. This land belongs to whoever files the claim first. If you don't take it, someone else will. Clara felt sick. The same government that had murdered her husband, that had driven her into the wilderness, that had stolen everything she owned. Now it offered her stolen land as compensation. Land that belonged to Talon in every way that mattered, if not in the eyes of white law. She looked at Talon again, trying to read his thoughts, but his face remained impassive. What do you want me to do? The choice is yours. That's not an answer. Talon's mouth twitched slightly. If you do not claim this land, someone else will. They will come and tell me to leave the home I built. They will trap my hunting grounds and cut my trees. He paused. But if you claim it, if the land is yours on paper, then no one can force us to leave. You would own what I have occupied. We would be protected by the same laws that would otherwise remove me. Clara understood what he wasn't saying. Claiming the land wasn't taking it from him. It was protecting it for both of them, creating legal shelter around the physical shelter they'd built together. All right, she turned to Judge Hutchins. I'll claim the land. 200 acres centered on Red Ridge Hollow, and I want it filed under both names, Clara Whitmore and Talon Greyhawk. Joint ownership. Hutchins frowned. Ma'am, as I explained, Indians can't. I heard what you said about the law. I'm telling you what I want. If the government wants to make restitution for murdering my innocent husband, they can start by respecting my wishes about how that restitution is distributed. Clara's voice turned hard. File it jointly or don't file it at all. I'll find other land. The judge exchanged glances with his companions, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, he sighed. I'll do what I can. Can't promise it'll be approved, but I'll submit the paperwork as requested. That's all I ask. Hutchins pulled out additional papers, explaining filing procedures and deadlines. Clara listened with half her attention, still reeling from the revelation about Thomas. Innocent. He'd been innocent, and he'd died anyway, hanged by people too eager for justice to wait for truth. When the judge and his men finally left, Clara stood watching their horses disappear into the trees. Talon came to stand beside her, Sarah balanced on his hip. "You did not have to do that," he said quietly. "Put my name on the papers." "Yes, I did. This is your home. I won't take that from you." Clara looked at him. "We're building this life together, remember? That means everything is ours, not mine or yours." "The law may not accept it. Then we'll figure something else out. But I had to try." Clara took a shaky breath. Thomas was innocent. They killed him for nothing. Talon shifted Sarah to his other hip and put his free hand on Clara's shoulder, the first time he'd touched her with simple comfort rather than practical necessity. "I know, and I'm sorry. Sorry he died. Sorry you lost him. Sorry the justice came too late to matter." $500 and 200 acres, Clara laughed bitterly. "Like that makes up for anything." "It does not, but it gives you choices you did not have before. Gives us choices." Talon squeezed her shoulder gently. "We can build a real cabin now. Plant larger gardens. Maybe buy chickens, a milk cow. Create something permanent." Clara looked around the hollow, at the shelter that had saved her life, at the trees blooming with spring growth, at the creek running full with snowmelt, at Sarah playing contentedly in the dirt, at Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle inside, at Talon standing solid and patient beside her. "I don't want to leave here," she said. "Even with money and options, I don't want to go anywhere else. Is that strange?" "No. This is home now. Why would you leave home?" "Home." The words settled into Clara's chest, warm and true. Red Ridge Hollow had become home, not because it was easy or comfortable or what she'd planned, but because it was where she'd rebuilt herself from broken pieces, where she'd learned to survive and then to thrive, where she'd found family in the last place she'd expected to look. Over the following weeks, Clara and Talon began planning their permanent homestead. They paced out the boundaries of the land claim, marked corners with stacked stones, discussed where to build a proper cabin with multiple rooms. Talon drew sketches in the dirt. Here the main house, here a barn, here gardens that would feed them year-round. The $500 arrived by courier in mid-May, more money than Clara had ever seen in one place. She and Talon traveled to the nearest settlement, a 2-day journey, and purchased supplies. Lumber for building, nails and tools, seeds for planting, 3 chickens and a rooster, a pregnant goat that Talon swore would be useful. The merchants looked at them oddly, a white woman and an Apache man shopping together, making decisions jointly, clearly partners in something the townspeople couldn't quite categorize. Clara didn't care what they thought. She'd stopped caring about other people's judgments somewhere between the storm and the birth and the moment she'd pointed a rifle at armed men. Their opinions had no power over her anymore. They returned to the hollow and began building in earnest. Talon taught Clara proper carpentry, how to notch logs and raise walls, how to create a roof that would shed rain and snow. They worked side by side through the long summer days, Sarah playing nearby while Thomas dozed in a sling against whichever parent wasn't holding tools. Other travelers passed through occasionally. Prospectors heading west, settlers looking for land, traders moving between territories. Some stopped to trade or ask directions. Most moved on quickly when they saw how Clara and Talon lived, understanding that this wasn't a situation they could easily categorize or control. One group stayed longer, a family of 4 heading to Oregon, their wagon broken and their supplies running low. Talon helped repair the wagon while Clara shared food and advice about the western route. The father looked uncomfortable accepting help from an Indian, but his wife had no such qualms. "You've built something good here," the woman said, watching Talon patiently show her husband how to reinforce the wagon's axle. "Not many people could survive out here alone." "We're not alone," Clara replied, bouncing Thomas on her hip. "We have each other. That makes all the difference." The woman studied Clara thoughtfully. "You and him, you're not married proper, are you?" "Depends on what you mean by proper." Clara met her gaze steadily. "We're partners. We're raising children together. We're building a life together. If that's not marriage, I don't know what is. But without a preacher, without legal..." "I stood in a church and said vows to my first husband. Had a preacher and a certificate and everything legal and proper. Clara's voice hardened. And the same government that recognized that marriage hanged him for a crime he didn't commit. So forgive me if I don't put much stock in official recognition anymore. The woman had no response to that. She helped her husband finish the repairs, accepted the food Clara offered for their journey, and left at dawn without further comment about propriety or legality. Clara watched them go and felt no regret. She'd spent enough of her life worrying about what other people thought, about fitting into boxes others built for her. Out here, she could build her own boxes, create her own definitions, live according to rules that made sense rather than rules that simply existed. By August, the cabin was finished. 2 rooms with space for expansion, a proper fireplace, windows with real glass purchased from the settlement. They moved in on a warm evening, Clara carrying Thomas while Talon carried Sarah and their few possessions. It felt momentous somehow, this transition from survival shelter to actual home. That night they sat outside watching the stars emerge one by one. Sarah had fallen asleep immediately in the new cabin, exhausted from excitement. Thomas nursed contentedly in Clara's arms, his small fingers curled around hers. "We did it," Clara said softly. "Built something permanent." "We did." Talon whittled a new toy for Sarah, the knife moving in familiar rhythms. "Though nothing is truly permanent, we know this better than most. Still, it feels different, like we're declaring we plan to stay." Clara shifted Thomas to her shoulder, patting his back gently. "Like we're putting down roots instead of just surviving season to season. Perhaps that is what healing looks like, moving from survival to living with intention." Talon examined his carving critically. "When I first came here, I only wanted to survive, to exist without pain. Now I want more than that." "What do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment, the knife still in his hands. "I want to watch Sarah learn to hunt, want to teach Thomas to track deer through the forest, want to build you a real barn and plant apple trees that will fruit in 5 years." He looked at her across the darkness. "Want to grow old with you beside me, watching our family expand and thrive. Want to die here eventually, buried beside people I loved instead of alone in exile." Clara's breath caught at the raw honesty. "That's a beautiful future. It is also terrifying. Wanting things means they can be lost. I lost everything once. The thought of losing again." He trailed off. "I know." Clara reached across the space between them, taking his free hand. "I lost everything too. Lost Thomas, lost my home, lost my certainty about who I was and where I belonged. And you're right. Wanting again is terrifying, but it's also human. We can't live only in fear of loss. We have to take the risk that love and family might survive." Talon laced his fingers through hers, his grip strong and warm. "Then we take the risk together. Together." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, lonely and wild. But Clara didn't feel lonely anymore. She felt anchored. She felt home. The seasons turned. Autumn brought harvest from the gardens they'd planted, abundance they carefully preserved for winter. Winter came hard, but they were prepared, their cabin warm and their stores plentiful. Spring returned with new life. The goat had her kids, the chickens multiplied, and Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news brought joy instead of fear. Talon carved another cradle without being asked, and Sarah, now almost 3, took her impending big sister status very seriously, practicing with her doll and informing anyone who would listen that she would be very helpful with the new baby. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, without the stress of survival overshadowing everything. Clara's body knew what to expect. Talon knew how to help. When labor started in early December, he was there from the first contraction, steady and calm, and exactly what Clara needed. Their daughter arrived healthy and screaming into the world, born during a gentle snowfall that blanketed the hollow in fresh white. Clara held her and thought about the storm that had driven her here, about how death and life were sometimes separated by the thinnest margins. "What do we name her?" Talon asked, his fingers stroking the baby's impossibly soft cheek. Clara had been thinking about this for months. "Hope. Her name is Hope."
Talon's eyes found Clara's across the firelight, and she saw understanding there. Hope for the future. Hope for healing. Hope for family and permanence and all the things they'd both thought lost forever. Hope, he repeated. A good name. A strong name. They registered Hope's birth at the settlement in spring, listing both parents' names on the paperwork. The clerk looked confused but filled out the forms anyway. Clara and Talon had learned that if you acted like your family structure was completely normal, most people eventually stopped questioning it. Years passed in the rhythm of seasons and growth. Sarah grew tall and capable, learning to hunt and trap alongside Talon, speaking both English and Apache with equal fluency. Thomas became a sturdy boy who loved animals and could spend hours watching birds or tracking rabbits. Hope was fierce and joyful, laughing easily but already showing the stubborn determination that had kept her mother alive through the worst of times. The land claim was finally approved in Thomas's 7th year, with both names listed as joint owners, after months of bureaucratic resistance and Clara's persistent refusal to accept any other arrangement. The papers arrived on a spring morning, official and legal, and completely unnecessary because they'd been living as though the land was theirs all along. Still, Clara hung the deed in the cabin above the fireplace, proof that the world had finally bent to accommodate what she and Talon had built, rather than forcing them to bend to the world's expectations. More families settled in the valley over the years. Some stayed distant, uncomfortable with the unusual household at Red Ridge. Others became friends, drawn by Clara's practical wisdom and Talon's quiet competence. He taught them to hunt and trap. She taught them to preserve food and deliver babies. Their cabin became a gathering place during hard winters, a refuge for travelers, a symbol of what could be built from survival and stubborn hope. On a warm evening in late summer, 10 years after Clara had stumbled freezing into the hollow, she stood at the ridge overlooking their land. The cabin had expanded, 3 rooms now, with a barn and chicken coop, gardens that produced more than they could eat. Apple trees Talon had planted were finally bearing fruit. Sarah was 15, already as skilled a hunter as any in the valley. Thomas was 9, gentle and thoughtful. Hope was 8, wild as the forest itself. Talon came to stand beside her, gray threading through his black hair now, lines carved deeper around his eyes. But he moved with the same quiet strength, the same steady presence that had saved Clara's life a decade ago. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Clara leaned against him, letting him take some of her weight. "About the woman I was when I came here, how broken and desperate and certain I was going to die. You were also strong, determined, willing to fight for your children. Maybe. But I couldn't see that then. All I could see was loss and fear and the certainty that I'd never be whole again." She looked up at him. "You gave me time to heal, space to rebuild. You never asked me to be anything other than what I could be in each moment. You did the same for me. Reminded me that caring was worth the risk, that family could be chosen, not only born into." Talon put his arm around her shoulders. "We saved each other, Clara. That is what partners do." Clara thought about that word, partners. She'd been a wife once, had loved with the passionate certainty of youth. What she and Talon had built was different, but no less real. They were partners in survival and purpose, and the daily work of creating life from wilderness. They'd never married in any official sense, but they'd built something stronger than paperwork. They'd built trust and commitment forged in shared hardship. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier now than they had the first time she'd spoken them, years ago. "Not the way I love Thomas, but deeply, truly. I know. I love you also. In the way I can love, steady and certain and choosing you every day." Talon kissed the top of her head. "We are good together. We make each other stronger." Sarah's voice called from the cabin, something about dinner being ready. Clara smiled and turned from the view, heading back toward the warm light spilling from the windows, toward the sound of children's laughter and the smell of cooking food and everything that meant home. She'd come to Red Ridge Hollow with nothing, no money, no shelter, no hope beyond the next breath. She'd been stripped of everything except her children and her will to survive. Some might say Talon had rescued her, but Clara knew better. She hadn't been rescued. She'd been given space and time and partnership. She'd been allowed to rebuild herself on her own terms.
to discover strengths she hadn't known she possessed, to create family from choice rather than obligation. And in the process, she'd rescued herself. That night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Clara carved something into a piece of wood she'd been saving. A small horse, smooth and simple. She handed it to Talon without explanation. He turned it over in his hands, then looked at her questioningly. "Sarah's getting older," Clara said. "Soon she'll be a woman grown, making her own choices. Thomas and Hope aren't far behind. Our children won't need us forever. No, they will make their own paths. So I wanted to ask you something." Clara took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "When the children are grown and gone, when it's just us, do you want me to stay? Or would you prefer to return to solitude, to the life you had before we came?" Talon set down the wooden horse and took both her hands in his dark eyes intense on hers. "Clara, I chose solitude because I had lost everything and thought isolation was safety. But you taught me that connection is worth the risk, that family chosen freely is stronger than walls built from fear." He pulled her closer. "When the children are grown, I want you beside me still. Want to grow old watching seasons turn, want to sit together in silence that speaks volumes, want to die knowing I lived fully instead of merely surviving." His voice dropped lower, rougher with emotion. "You asked what we are to each other. We are partners, companions, the parents of 3 children who carry both our teachings. We are whatever we choose to be, undefined by others' rules." He paused. "And if you are asking whether I choose you, whether I want you to stay, the answer is yes. Today, tomorrow, for whatever years remain. Yes." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears this time. Healing tears. She leaned forward and kissed him, something they did rarely, both of them carrying ghosts of other loves. But when they did, it felt like coming home. "Then I stay," she whispered against his lips. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, because there's nowhere else I'd rather be." Outside, wind whispered through the pines. An owl called in the distance. The hollow that had sheltered them through the hardest seasons lay peaceful in the moonlight, waiting for whatever came next. Clara settled into Talon's arms, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the solid reality of him beneath her cheek. She'd lost so much, her husband, her home, her certainty about who she was. But in losing everything, she'd found something deeper. She'd found the strength to survive, the courage to rebuild, the wisdom to recognize love in its quieter forms. She'd found home not in a place but in choice, in partnership, in the daily decision to stay and build in trust that tomorrow might be better than yesterday. The woman who'd collapsed in the snow 10 years ago, desperate and broken and certain she was dying, would barely recognize the woman Clara had become. Strong, capable, rooted deep in land she'd claimed not through inheritance but through survival. That frightened, freezing woman had thought she had nowhere left to go. She'd been wrong. She'd had exactly one place left to go. Forward. Into the storm. Into the hollow. Into the arms of a man who understood grief and solitude. Into a life built from broken pieces assembled with stubborn hope. Clara closed her eyes and let herself rest, surrounded by family, anchored by choice, finally and completely home. She hadn't been rescued from the storm that day. She'd been given the chance to rebuild, and she had taken it.